Okay, well, thank you everybody here for joining us. Tonight we have a special guest, Karen Berggren. Although Karen is a biologist, she has a lifelong interest in archaeology and anthropology. Professionally, Karen has worked for the Girl Scouts, National Park Service, the Arizona State Parks, and for 22 years, she managed Homolody Ruins State Park from the planning stage and until 2010. She retired. She has worked closely with the Hopi elders in identifying cultural concerns and in the interpretation of archaeological site and traditional culture. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm so glad that y'all are with us tonight. First of all, I want to tell you, I'm not Hopi, obviously. And so you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt, because I'm Southern Baptist. You ask me about Baptist, I can tell you about Baptist. It's in my bones. But it's always possible that I have misinterpreted something that I've heard that has been told to me. I've been very fortunate that the Hopis, the elders, have been quite open about speaking to me about things, because they were highly supportive of the establishment of the park, because there was a problem with illegal pot hunters coming out, and they wanted to have it protected. So they were behind this. So that was good. And they did tell me some things that I cannot pass on to you because it's sacred knowledge, but they thought I should know about it since I was managing the area. And also, as one elder told me, he says, I know you're a Baptist, so I know you're not going to try to steal our ceremonies. Because they're very concerned about this, because sacred knowledge is dangerous. Because if you learn these things and do them incorrectly, you can cause a great deal of harm. So they go through almost like an apprenticeship. When a young person becomes, becomes a member of one of the societies and is initiated into the Katsina society, they go through like an apprenticeship. When they first join, they don't know everything. They don't tell them everything. It goes in stages, and at each stage they learn more because they have learned how to handle that information. Asking a Hopi questions can be very difficult for them because they're not supposed to be telling this to you if you've not been initiated. And so a lot of times they'll tell you something that is just sort of set to satisfy you, but isn't the real story behind it. One thing you often hear is that you're only supposed to tell stories in the winter. And what Hopis often say is, tourists ask, well, why can't you tell them in the summer? And they'll say, oh, because then the snakes will bite you because you're staying up telling stories instead of getting your sleep so you can work in the field. But what one elder told me, and I thought this made a lot more sense, is that the spoken word is extremely powerful and can actually affect the workings of the world, the natural processes. If you tell them in the winter, then the earth is dozing. And it's sort of like when you're half asleep and someone is talking, you know they're talking, but you don't really hear what they're saying. So it's safe to tell these stories in the winter. But in the summer, when the earth is awake and things are growing, and if you tell a story and tell it incorrectly, you could actually have a very bad effect on the natural processes. So that's why they avoid telling stories in the summertime. That's what they told us Baptists. So, but realize that you need to be aware of this if you're like up on the Hopi mesas or something, and you'll want to ask somebody something. It's sort of discourteous because you're putting them in a hard place. It's one reason why Hopis have a hard time being park rangers, because people are asking them questions all the time. And we've had Hopis work for us as park rangers, but I would try to put them in positions and give them responsibilities that did not require people talking to them about sacred knowledge. And I would tell them, I said, you don't have to answer them. You say, I can't answer that, or you can pass them off to one of the Anglos that doesn't know any better. So realize, as I said, I may have misunderstood something, but I've tried really hard to be aware of where they're coming from on these things. And one of these things is the Katsina. The Katsinam is plural for Katsina. And Anglos tend to lump any supernatural being among the Hopi, especially if it's carved and masked, they call it a Katsina. There's actually different categories. What the Hopis call Katsinam are the closest thing in European culture is saints, because they're not gods. But if you're a really, really good person, after you die, you may come back as a Katsina and dance in the plazas. It used to be that the Katsina spirits actually came physically and danced. But then the Hopis turned away from the true way, and it angered the Katsina, and they swore that never again would they come and dance in the plazas. As a result, there was a terrible drought. Crops failed. People were starving. And so the people begged them to please come back. And they said, well, what we'll do is we won't come physically ourselves. But if you're following the true Hopi way, we will come in spirit, and we will enter the bodies of those men who have prepared themselves. And they believe that for the period of that dance, those men actually become Katsinam. So if you're up on the mesas, you don't ask someone, well, is that your son out there dancing in the plazas? No, it's not. It may physically be the son, but it's actually, for the period of that dance, it is a Katsina. And also, I've been told that no one should carve a Katsina who has not first looked through the eyes of a Katsina. So that means your Hopi or Zuni or one of the Pueblo Indians that follow the Katsina cult. So you're Hopi or whatever, and you're male, you've been initiated, and you have participated in the Katsina ceremony. So these are requirements, and no one else should be carving a Katsina. And a lot of people ignore that. I had this lady come in one time, and she wanted instructions, a book on it, of instructions on how to carve a Katsina, because she was a den mother, or whatever they call them. She was responsible for a Boy Scout troop, and her Boy Scouts were studying Indian cultures, and they wanted to learn more about Indians. I said, well, now how would you feel if a Japanese Boy Scout troop wanted to learn more about Americans? So they held a fake communion service. There's some prerequisites for communion, and it's really bad for someone to be doing this just to demonstrate what Christians do. It's the same way with carving Kachina dolls. I was at St. Louis and Cahokia Mounds, and I went into their gift shop. I always do this, and scope around to see what they're doing there. And they had a bunch of Navajo-made kachinas. And it said authentic Indian-made kachinas. So I asked to speak to their manager, and their manager came in, and I said, these are not authentic. She said, oh yeah, they were made by, I said, they're not, yeah, and if a Navajo carves a kachina, it's no more authentic than if I carved it. And these all were signed at the bottom by Begay and So, and they were made by Navajos. Navajos do not carve kachina dolls because they're not part of the kachina religion. They do carve yebaches, and yebaches are okay because that's not the same thing. But a lot of people think that as long as it's made by an Indian, it's okay. Well, but it's a cultural thing. It's a definite group of followers of this particular religion. The Katsina religion is quite old. In 1200s was a really boom time for it at Homolovi. And that was the people that were coming down from the north. And it's at that time that we find they were growing cotton and corn and hunting rabbits. We got lots of rabbits. A lot of trade was going on. And this is also, if you look down into Mexico, they were doing a lot of trade with Mexico. And a lot of the clan symbols are found in petroglyphs in Mexico. Eric Pulingama was telling about going on a trip down there to look at the petroglyphs. And he could trace out the clan symbols there in Mexico that showed the connection with this Four Corners area. That there's a synchronicity there that is really important. The kachinas, as I said, what the Hopis consider kachinas are these spirits, ancestor spirits. When you die, if you're a really good person, first what they do is they ride the rain clouds over to the San Francisco peaks. And there's an opening there that takes them down to the previous world. But if they're a really good person, they may come back in the form of a katsina and dance in the plazas and bless the people. Other kachina dolls, see, there's a difference between kachinas and kachina dolls. The Katsintihu kachina dolls are representative of the kachina spirits. They're not idols, but they are very powerful. So you need to handle them properly. The Hopis have been very concerned about some of these kachinas that have been collected and are in museums and are in storage and maybe have a plastic bag over them protecting them. The problem is that when they're covered like that with a plastic bag, the power that's in the kachina sort of builds up, sort of like mothballs, okay? So you know how if you have an enclosed structure, enclosed container, and you have mothballs in there, if you then open up the container, you get hit full blast by the smell of those mothballs. In a similar way, if you have a kachina doll, Katsintihu, in one of those, it's stored in a box or a enclosed container, and you open it, you're hit by that power full force. So it could be bad for your health. So the elders have gone around to a lot of these museums and requested that they store them in a different manner so that they don't build up that accumulated power and cause problems. A lot of people consider Kokopelli to be a kachina. this is a representation of Kokopelli. Kokopelli is the humpback flute player. And he was sort of a traveling salesman. He had traveled throughout the Pueblo world, and he carried seeds. So he's a fertility symbol. And the hump on his back is the trader's pack and carries seeds and other things. I was at a Katsina dance at Haute Villa, and Kokopelli showed up, and the clowns attacked him and slid open that hump. And all these good things came out, food and seeds and corn and all that stuff. That was in his hump. So he's a different category of Hopi supernatural being. And he's found throughout the Southwest. Now, there is some discussion among the Hopis as to who Kokopelli really is. A lot of people connect him with the robber fly. You know, the robber fly has that very thick thorax, and they say that that's who Kokopelli is. Others say it's the katydid because of the wings that form that hump sort of type thing, and a proboscis that comes out, and that's what we call the flute. So there was another one. There's like 3 different really insects that are sort of clumped into Kokopelli. So, but he very much a fertility symbol. He's a really licentious individual. Also, everything in the world is alive. And many of these Katsina dolls are representing different lives, different beings in nature. Like this is the Roadrunner. And when you're carving a Katsina, the person who's carving it, because they've gone through this apprenticeship, they know how the doll is supposed to be done. You know, what the features are on it, what kind of costume it's wearing, how it should be represented. And because these things are imbued with power, you don't want to be selling them. This is one of the concerns that the Hopis had with the Indian school down in Phoenix, because the Katsina dolls are given to young girls. And the very first Katsina that's given to them is a Katsintihu, a cradle Katsina.
Would you like me to hold them up to the
Yeah,
camera?
this is a cradle Katsina. And it's very flat. It's not got arms and legs sticking out. And it's at an early stage of development of the child. And so they're getting a similar stage of Katsina doll, in that this is put in the cradle with her, because it's just girls that have received them. And it's supposed to help the child develop the attributes of a good woman. This particular one is a Hahai-Wuti. The Hahai-Wuti, actually, the Hahai-Wuti is probably my favorite. She is the mother of the Katsinas. And she also has ceremonial responsibilities for dogs. She makes dogs behave properly. I've got them all over my house, and it sort of semi-works. So that's her. It was sort of interesting in what I was talking about. She had ceremonial responsibility for dogs. Some of the Hopis were concerned that people would misunderstand who she was, and you know, she was might be considered an impolite name as the mother of dogs.
Oh.
So I have to be careful about that, so be sure that people understand. So she's responsible for that they behave properly, especially during ceremonies, because they usually have a lot of dogs around. So the cradle Kachina starts
Yeah,
out
show
with
the
a
other
hive
one.
with deep carpet.
You want me to show the other one?
Yeah, the roadrunner here.
Yeah.
As the child matures, the kachinas get more developed also. Now, in the old style kachinas, and I don't have one here, they are fairly simple. The kachina dolls are made from cottonwood roots. Now, the cottonwood roots are important because where you have cottonwoods, that's where you find the water, and the roots go down into the water there, so that they have close association with water. Also, they don't have knot holes in them, so they're easy to carve. They're a lot like balsa, and it's lightweight, it's easily carved, but it's associated with water. Now what we're getting is that I used to go to, they have a carving show down in Phoenix for wood carvers of everybody, bird carvings and all kinds of carving. And almost always there'd be someone carving kachina dolls who was not Native American. And they seem to have no understanding of what they're doing there. But kachina dolls are very popular as a sales item. So if a Hopi does this, they need to be something wrong with the kachina doll. Like the left-handed kachina might be right-handed. And they've not been blessed. They've not been used in a ceremony. So they've not been, in essence, consecrated. The Navajo have found that you can make a lot of money off of these kachina dolls. And they have actually set up factories up on the Navajo reservation. There's like 5 of them. And they mass produce the parts. Now, see, the traditional kachina doll is all one piece. That's one reason why the arms are like this, because they don't stay together too well if you put them out. And a lot of these dolls that they make are this style that became popular like in the 50s, because that's when tourists started coming in a lot. And they make these kachina dolls that are sort of like this. And what they do is they carve a whole bunch of arms. Use a bandsaw and cut out arms, and then cut out a bunch of torsos and a bunch of legs, and then glue them all together and have some teenager over there with poster paints painting them up. And that's what they'd sell. Those authentic Indian made kachina dolls. Right. And it was a source of income, but it's not an authentic Indian doll, kachina doll. So when I was at Homology, we made a point of buying from the carvers, and the carvers were male Hopis. The females, I didn't buy kachina dolls from. Now there were some kachinas that in the let's see, about 65 or so, they started carving what we call spirit kachinas, which is like this. So it's a single piece of wood. It's been carved, sometimes using wood burning tools. And these are pretty good. They're not the traditional style, but they're easily made, and they should still be carved by the men. I did have some, and it's in one of those storage boxes that my house had flooded twice in the last 2 years. Yeah. These people would come in and put all the stuff in boxes and didn't know what they were doing, but these carvings were developed by uh, Randy saw me. Randy saw me's Corn Clan, and he's a wonderful carver. But these were Hopi maidens. So they were not Katsinas. There are Hopi maiden Katsinas, but these were sculptures. And they were very much like these spirit ones, but they're a straight thing with a female face and the maiden buns. And so those I would buy from women because they were not.
Show this one off?
Pardon?
You want me to show this one?
Well, sure, yeah. But since they weren't really Kachina dolls, I could do that with them. Now with Navajos, I would not buy a Kachina doll from a Navajo. What I told him is, you carve something from your culture, and I'll buy it. And there was one Navajo, he was just wonderful. He would do sculptures similar to this style, but from traditional Navajo stories. And there was one story that was when animals walked upright like people. And he made the most wonderful carvings. I have an elk that he carved. And it's standing up, it's wearing a chief's robe, and just wonderful. And he carved a stallion and a mare and a colt. And I got those from him, and just beautiful things. So if it's in their culture, I would get it. But with the Hopis, the carving of the Katsintihu is so integral as part of their culture that it is something that almost all the Hopi men do. Some are better than others, but like this one, there's that Hahai Wuti again. Wuti means woman or matron. Matron is probably the best word for it, because a maiden is a mana. So a Katsin mana is a maiden. So it's female. And this is with an ogre. Now, ogres can be really frightening. When the ogre dance occurs, these are.
You want me to show this one?
Yes, these go from house to house, and they're visiting the homes to see if they're living in a true Hopi way. Yeah, and they'll if a child is not in a traditional outfit, those ogres will really give them a rough time. And sometimes for the young boy, to prove how brave he is, he'll tie a rat to the end, a carcass, a dead rat to the end of a stick, and hold it out, offer it to the ogres, and oh, they'll just have a fit. I was at I'd been invited to a person's home for this dance, and they were going from place to place, and they gave me a pretty hard time, because of course I was not dressed traditionally, and I was not Hopi, so they said, "Oh, you're Bahana." I said, "No, I'm not. Bahana is a white person." And I said, "No, I'm not Bahana. I'm Sami." And they said, "Sami, Corn Clan." I said, "No, Sami reindeer people." I'm Swedish and Lap. And so that's what the traditional Laps call themselves, is Sami. So Samoyed, you know about Samoyed. So those are, that word is based on the word for the Laps. So they thought that was really funny that I was a reindeer person, Sami. But they still do that. They go from house to house. I was at, what was it? Bakabi had a dance. And the runners, Kachinas, were accompanying the ogres going around from place to place. And there was this one gal, and she got too close. And so the runners tossed a lasso at her. Well, the lasso got around the corner of her jacket. And when the runner pulled it, it looped around the apple that was in her jacket, and they were pulling her towards them. And she had to skin out of that jacket because they were going to take her off and set her in a corner someplace because she was not showing proper respect. The Hopi say that we're passing through a series of worlds. Now, a lot of people translate the word Hopi as peaceful people, but closer to it is people who live in the proper way. So when they were in the previous world, people started living improperly, and it became decadent. Koyaanisqatsi, world in chaos. So, and there were witches. And so the people who remained true to the proper way, they were escaping through a hole in the sky to this next world. They climbed up through the river cane, and they were climbing up, and as they came into this world, they met Ma'asau. Now, Ma'asau is a supernatural being. He's responsible for this world. And he's the one that gave permission for us to live here. And his requirement was that they were to live as he lives. He is an upright person and a farmer. So when these people came up, they made that agreement with him. But then a witch made its way up through that river cane. And so they closed off that river cane. Some witches got through. That's why we have witches in this world. But the segments in the cane are marking the segments where the people were caught, the witches were caught in the river cane. So they entered this world, and Ma'asau gave them instructions that they were to travel throughout the world, going from place to place. As the sign came, it was time to move on. And this was to continue until they came to the center of the world, which is the Hopi Mesas, where the Hopis live today. So each of the clans has a different migration route and passed through that route at a different time. Along this migration route, at the very start of it, there was a bear, and dead bear. And the first clan that came through, they were the Bear Clan. And as each group came through, the bear was getting more and more disintegrated. But they took their names from that carcass. And so you have the Greasy Eye Sockets clan. And these the Bluebird clan was from bluebirds that were perched on the ribs of the carcass, the skeleton of the bear. So they all have this story of how they got their names through these different, when they saw it. Other clans are named for, a lot of them have corn-related clan names. The corn silk is one of the clan names. You have the corn clan. You often will have a major clan and then smaller ones associated with it. So you have the Water Clan, and you have the Reed Clan, and you have such like that. So they're all associated with Water Clan, but it was caused because they was a major clan and they split off. The first clan that settles at a site is responsible for it. So like up on the mesas, there'll be different responsible clans at different villages. And when a new clan comes in, they have to show that they have something which will help the community. And usually it's a ceremony or a skill or something like that. So when they have the Katsina dances, that clan has the responsibility for maintaining that ceremony and teaching the stories to the young men about those Katsinam. There is a rather sad story. There's there were some effigies. As I said, they weren't really Katsinas, but they were sculptures that were at the base of Second Mesa. And they were hidden in a small cave on a bed of feathers. And these effigies were used during the initiation ceremonies for the young men. And there was a Kachina dance going on up on the mesas. And there was these people came up there, these Anglos, actually from Chino Valley. And they had a Hispanic guy with them. And some Hopi saw him down there, but they thought the Hispanic guy was a Hopi. So they didn't realize those guys were unaccompanied in a sensitive area. And they found those effigies and they took them. And they hid them under a bush near the road and went and got their car and came back and got the effigies. In the process of doing that, they missed what the smallest of the effigies, and they left that behind. But then they went down to the Chino Valley, and they were going to sell them. Well, it so happened that when they were going to sell them, they took them down to Scottsdale to a dealer down there, and he was sort of suspicious. So he called in Jerry Jacka, who was a well-known photographer. And he took photographs of them, but he didn't recognize what they were. But he was suspicious too, so he kept those pictures. And when the Hopis finally, they were reticent to talk about this to Anglos. But when they finally told I guess it was the FBI or Secret Service or somebody like that, they got in contact with Jerry Jacka, and he had the photographs of those things. But when they closed in on the guys, they claimed that they had burned them because they heard that the feds were getting close. But one elder told me that he says, no, they're not burned. He said, if they were destroyed, I would know it. They're still there somewhere. You know, they sold them or they hidden them or something. But the problem is that because these effigies were an important part of the initiation ceremony for the young men, they have not had an initiation since then. So it's been like, oh, I guess 25 years. They've not been able to initiate young men in this particular Kachina clan. So it has repercussions that we don't think about. When you look at the Katsinam themselves, they have close ties with the god figures in Mexico and South America. There are Kachinas that look very much like Tlaloc, the rain god. It has two staffs and is often seen in these sculptures, Mayan and Aztec sculptures. These seem to have come back up from Mexico and come back into the Four Corners area and have influenced the Katsina religion here because there was so much trade going on between this area that it was cross-seeding in essence. The characteristics of those Katsinam are not the same as the ones down in Mexico, because as I said, the ones down in Mexico are more controlling gods than they are the Katsina up here. The Katsinam tend to be associated with certain areas, certain clans, certain ceremonies, and certain characteristics. So learning those characteristics, it can be really confusing. As I said, where I'm from, Southern Appalachians, we were sort of cursed with anthropologists also. And they would come in and they'd be asking questions about the mountain culture and beliefs and all like this. And where I'm from, the highest form of humor is to tell those anthropologists something totally outrageous. And they believe it. And they'll write it up. And I do wonder sometimes whether we're being treated the same way by the Native Americans. I just sort of,
Yeah.
okay, they just go along with it, because who am I to say what their belief is? But realize, as I said, if you're not from that culture, you're not going to understand the inner meanings of all these things. Even if you are from that culture, you may not. Looking at what some people say about Christianity, and if Christ had had an AK-47, he wouldn't have been able to be, the Romans wouldn't have been able to hang him on the cross. Well, didn't you know that he had legions of angels at his call? What did he do with an AK-47? In the same way, we might not be understanding what is the meaning of these. We also, our own cultural taboos may be interfering. One of the things we did at Homology is we would have different workshops. One of them was storytelling workshops. Sometimes I'd have a hard time getting someone from the Hopi Mesas to come down and do this, because it was always at a time of the year where it was snowing or it was terrible weather. So I remember this one where I gotten one of the guys who, Hopis, who actually lived in Winslow and worked at the park. And so he was there. We had two adult couples that attended. No kids, thank goodness. Because he started talking about Spider Grandmother. Now, Spider Grandmother is another one of these very licentious individuals. And his story he was telling was rather graphic. And the couples that were there, it was so funny, because I know that they heard this was a storytelling workshop, and they were thinking fairy tales. They were not getting fairy tales. They were getting stories that are traditional stories, and Hopis do not have the same taboos about sexual stories that Anglos do. So he was telling the story, and I was going around, different cultures, different taboos. You know. So that's something that's to be aware of. The Katsinas, when the Hopis were making their migrations, as I said, they would go to a spot, and it's sort of funny because you hear all these scientists talking about, and we don't know where they went, and we don't know why they left. Well, they left because the sign came. It was time to move on. At Homology, what I've been told is that the Hopis left here because the sign came to move on, and the sign was fire in the sky. Well, about, I guess it was 30 years ago, I was out at night, and it was during the solar flares. There were a lot of solar flares. We had aurora borealis at Homology, and they were bright red curtains to the north.
That's a sign.
That's the sign. It's something that happens rarely. It's part of their traditional stories, and that's what was a sign for them to go on. There was a young woman living at Homology that was pregnant, and she couldn't travel to the north, so she stayed there. And she said, I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to watch over Homology for you. And that was what she did. She stayed there. And I can't pronounce her name, but she's the mother of all game animals. And so when she gave birth to her babies, they were actually twin antelope. And when the people who'd traveled on north, they went up as far as the Giant's Chair. And when they came back, they found her there and her babies, and she said she was going to stay there and continue to watch over Homology for the Hopi people. So again, she's someone that would be represented as a Katsina doll. But she's a particular person, and they can trace that Katsina back to that particular person and that particular story. When they went on up to the mesas, as I said, the first clan that settles there is responsible for it and assigns the other clans where to build their homes and which fields to use. I was speaking with an elder. Well, an elder came in one day and he said, you know, what about so-and-so? And I said, well, I discussed that with this particular elder. And he said, oh, he's the Sun Forehead clan. They said the Sun Forehead clan, they know this much. Says Sun clan, we know all of it. I said, oh, okay. So, you know, I made the notes that he gave me. Well, then I had a Sun Forehead clan person come in. And it's sort of the same thing I went through. You know, I've talked to Valdine, and I've talked to Dalton, and I've talked to, they said, well, Sun Forehead says we got there just as the sun was coming up over the horizon. But Sun Clan, they didn't get there till the sun was way up in the sky. So different stories from different people, but they do have very definite ideas about the order of the migration and where the people came from and why they moved into this area. Speaking of which, Darlene, we talked about this. Last night, I was watching TV, and my friend that I share the house with, she really liked Skinwalker Ranch. Yeah, and after Skinwalker Ranch is beyond Skinwalker Ranch. And this time, they were talking about Rock Art Ranch. And John
Dover.
Yeah, John Dover. His name was slipping. John Dover was a Navajo Cultural Resources Officer, and he's highly respected. And I used to see a lot of him. In fact, there was an article written up about him in Reader's Digest magazine, and it was talking about how he was trying to protect all these cultural resources. It was such a huge area that he was guarding. And some rich guy saw the article and thought it was fascinating. So he purchased a whole bunch of remote sensing devices for John to use in keeping track of what was going on at the different sites. Well, the interesting thing is that some of those things were designed to look like rocks, and they had speakers in them. And he said he'd actually at times observed someone, not acting correctly in one of these archaeological sites, and he just holler out from that rock, "Don't do that!" Said you never saw people get so. But he was a definite believer in skinwalkers. Now, I don't know how traditional he was otherwise, because with Navajos, the real concern is being around things that had been owned by people who then died, because the Chindi ghosts are attracted to things they owned when they died. So that's a real concern with Navajos. And yet here he was working as a cultural resources specialist. But he told me that he was driving across the res late one night, and movement caught him out of the corner of his eye, and he looked, and here was this guy running beside his truck and keeping up with him. Now that spooks you. And he hit the gas, and he finally managed to get away with it from him. But he said that was a skinwalker. And that was one skinwalker story that really gave me the spooks, because I have a lot of respect for John. But when he was talking about Rock Art Ranch, problem is that those petroglyphs at Rock Art Ranch are in the Pueblo culture. They're not in the Navajo culture. And he has gotten a little, he had a lot of connections of it with extraterrestrial. Now the Hopi, some of the Hopi Katsinas are star Katsinas, but I have not heard any stories about them having come down from the different planet and all, but he was given that impression, and I think Darlene agreed with me. It was getting sort of woo woo. But I'm not, I mean, I can't say, because I don't know. No one's told me anything like that. All I can say is what they have shared with me and have given me permission to share with you. So do any of you have any questions so far?
Yes, the little, the cradle Kachina.
Yes.
You said that was given to like little girls,
Yeah, infant girls.
but it's the mother.
Well, but the Hahahuti, she's the mother, but she has such good characteristics. She's caring. She makes sure that everybody behaves properly, like mothers do. So it's the attributes of that Katsina that are imparted to the baby. So it's just physically that the cradle Katsina is undeveloped. But the characteristics that she's sharing, that's what's important.
And is there a reason that we know of that it's flat?
Well, because the baby is really simply formed too. I mean, it's not walking, it's not talking, it's a simplified, in essence, a simplification of what an adult is.
Oh.
So as the child develops, the Kachina develops. Any other questions?
Do you speak Hopi?
She does.
I could not carry on a conversation in Hopi. But if I know what their subject matter is, I know pretty much how they feel about it. I was at a meeting with the Hopis, and the state parks archaeologist was there. And they were talking about this problem of archaeologists having dug up these sites and taken things out, and now they find that, with federal laws, that they're supposed to return them and rebury them. Well, the thing is, this elder was saying, he said, we're not sure where that came from. And if it was created by someone else, or if it has evil connotations to it, if we bury it in one of our cemeteries, it could be introducing that evil effect into it. And they were very concerned about this. Well, this was all being discussed in Hopi. But every now and then I would understand the word. So I was translating to the archaeologists what they were saying about reburial of these archaeological items. And she was saying, do you speak Hopi? And I said, well, I know some Hopi. And I know how they feel about this stuff because we've discussed it. So I can extrapolate from that what they're saying. But there's no way that I could carry on. I could not initiate a discussion because I wouldn't be sure what your words to use. So yeah, I understand a lot of Hopi, but I don't speak it. I'm sure many of you can understand that from trying to
Oh,
speak
yeah.
Spanish.
That's right.
Yeah.
Question here. On the small Katsina there, is there any meaning to that dot pattern that's painted on it?
Those are corn cobs.
And what about the little one, the cradle one?
Well, that's corn also.
Okay,
Corn husk.
Yeah, see the corn kernels?
Can we
Uh,
put them up for the?
corn is so integral to Hopis that
Corn.
yeah, they will select a mother corn when a child is born too, and that they will hang that up, and that's a blessing for the child. I was at a meeting with the Hopis one time, and they were concerned about genetics being introduced on the Hopi Mesa to the corn genetics, especially these GMO and all these, and because the different families can own different strains of corn. And in this time period, there had not been much rain up on the Hopi Mesa, so their corn crop didn't do too well. The corn crop, the men work the corn, but the corn belongs to the woman. She's responsible for drying it and preserving it and selecting the best of it for seeds for the following year. Well, there was this guy from New Mexico that was coming over with truckloads of corn and selling it up at the Second Mesa Cultural Center. And the Hopi ladies were just lined up outside to buy corn because their crop had failed. But the trouble is, the elders were concerned that this was corn that was GMO.
Oh,
yeah.
See?
That makes sense.
And that was getting introduced into their traditional corn, which was contaminated. So they have a lot of concerns about how they're being impacted by outside culture. One Hopi elder told me that the worst thing that ever happened up on the Hopi Mesas was satellite dishes. Because it brought in TV programs. And another, of course, one bad thing too, I think I started talking about this earlier, was the Indian school down in Phoenix. They would take the young girls down there for the school, and these young girls are coming from a culture that basically was barter system. You know, they didn't have money. So, but they had these Katsina dolls that were worth a lot of money to Anglo collectors. And the concern of the elders was that they were selling these Katsina dolls that had been blessed and gone through this whole process and had that power imbued in them, and that they were selling them for money, and that was not appropriate. So
Is Kokopelli Hopi?
Kokopelli is everywhere. I mean, he's not, like I say, he's not really a Kachina. He's found throughout the Southwest. And there's actually been some symbols of him found back east. So he got around a lot.
He's
Yeah.
all over in the petroglyphs, and
Yeah.
they call them Kokopellis or flute players.
Mhm.
I don't know if they're slightly different.
Well, they're actually the same thing, as I said, the katydids and the robber flies and all, the proboscis, the insect proboscis, that is represented on petroglyphs, is interpreted as the flute. So there's like 3 or 4 different versions of Kokopelli. But basically, as I said, he's a fertility symbol. And most Hopis say he's a robber fly.
And what's the story with your belt or your sack?
I dislike it. The Katsina dolls, as I said, well, here you can see that they often have this color combination to them. The weaving is done by the men, and they do it in the kivas. And that's why when you're the archaeologists are looking at a kiva, you'll find these holes in the floor that the loom makers will be underneath, and they'll have a loom that ties to the rafters and then comes down and is looped through that, pushed through that hole and looped around a rock. And that's what anchors it there. And the symbols on here, the red is for animal life, and the green is for plant life. And these symbols along here are for a variety of things. The symbols, just everything that Hopis do seems to have a meaning to it. But what that meaning is, people disagree on. Like in this carving of Kokopelli, there's these stair-step symbols, and some people say that those symbols are the rain clouds, they're thunder clouds. Others say they're the cliffs of the mesas going up. So there's disagreement, but it needs to be there. On this one, there's a Kokopelli on the back side of him, and you can see here's the belt he's carrying, that he wears, and the fringe at the bottom represents rain. And you'll see the same thing on the kilts that the dancers wear when they're in the performing ceremony. The kilt has the same colors and has a fringe. And the Hopi say that when you die, there's a white robe, a wedding robe that is made, that is white with fringe on the bottom, and it is used to wrap the body when they go back, go back to the previous world. They're wrapped in that, and they ride on these baskets, the sister basket, not sister baskets, but the woven basket, like those ones on the wall back there. You see those. Yeah. Well, same idea. They're not Katsina, but those about that size, and they're woven. And those are, the women weave the baskets and they present them to the men, and then the men can ride those when they die. They ride them back into the previous world.
Are they big?
Not the ones they give. They're about this big,
Uh-huh.
but that's what they're representing.
Represent.
On the Kokopelli, there's 2 of them, isn't there? Isn't there a male and female?
Yes, well, most Katsinas have female versions of them. So you have a Katsina and Katsinmana or Katsimuti. And yes, there is a female version of the Kokopelli. So you need to look at what the ending is. If it's Wuti, like I said, it's a matron. If it's Mana, it's a maiden.
you're talking Hopi today. Did you have a lot of tribes that you learned about? Or basically,
Not as personally. I mean, I've read a lot,
Mhm.
and I've been to Zuni. I was very good friends with a Badger Clan person, and I was invited over. They were having a naming ceremony for his niece, and it's the uncle. It's the mother's brother or someone from her family that named the child. So they came over and they named her Honanmana. Well, it was sort of funny because I was there at the house with the Zuni family, and the two Hopis had gone off to see some other relatives. And they were talking and they said, I wonder what that Honanmana, I wonder what that means. And I said, oh, Honan is actually badger. So it means badger maiden. And well, they were very impressed that there was an Anglo there translating the name of their child for them. But Hon is bear and Honan is badger. And both the bear and the badger are medicinal people. So you might have heard about bear root. If you're in Flagstaff and you don't go to, well, I don't know what she's calling it now, but there's a herb shop in the old Babbitt building, and she has a lot of really good Katsina dolls. Pardon?
No.
Someone think of the name of it? It's not Puchteka. Puchteka was another shop, pretty good shop in town, and Puchteka means trader. So that was a good name for that shop. But it's Hogan is the name of the woman who runs the shop, and she's Anglo, but she was married to Hopi, Navajo, I guess it was, and so she had some good authentic stuff in there. Yeah, and she has bear root, and she has Indian tea, Navajo tea, which is also found along the road on the way up to the mesas. The trouble is, if it's right next to the paved road, you don't want to be using it for tea.
That makes sense.
Got
would it
pollution on it.
be Winter sun herb?
Yes, winter sun. I'm getting
Cool.
old.
It looks cool.
Getting names sometimes. But she is, you can believe what she says. She's very careful to be accurate.
So the Kachina dolls in those shops are authentic. Okay.
Yeah, she's at least last time, I mean, I don't know if she's still running it or not, but it used to be very good. It used to be really good at La Posada in Winslow. But the different person is running his shop now. And so they have more variety on who their makers are. Polite way of putting it. We were talking about at dinner about Kachina inspired dolls. And she made it every time while she was talking about it, I was impressed. She kept saying these are not Kachina dolls, these are Kachina doll inspired. So she was being very careful about that, and I really appreciated that because a lot of
They had
people
gourds, so they can't really be Katsinas anyway.
Yeah. I wasn't going to say it
That's
was
okay,
you.
everybody knows it.
Yeah. So I was very pleased at that she was so adamant about these are not real Kachina dolls. Because they're not, because she's obviously not male. So
So how long did you study?
well, I mean, this has been a lifelong interest.
That's what I was gonna say, it's like.
You know, it's not something that I never studied archaeology and anthropology. I did have some anthropology classes, but I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and they were talking about the hill people and the Cherokee. So, what I've learned here, you might say it was on the job training.
Oh, nice.
You know, attitude I've had a long time, but I have to hand it to the elders. They were very generous with information that they felt that I needed.
Well, that was really
Yeah.
nice.
Because the problem is, like, when they've worked with like the Forest Service and about the ski area and stuff like that, one of the elders was telling me, he said, the problem is that they said, well, just tell us which areas to avoid and we'll put a fence around it and keep people out. That doesn't work, because when you put a fence around it, it's like saying, hey,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right here,
Where the
that's
good
where it
stuff
is.
Yeah.
So they don't want to tell where these things are, because it would just attract too much attention to it. And Darlene and I were very concerned about them highlighting Rock Art Ranch on that program last night, because I'm sure that a lot of people have never even heard of Rock Art Ranch or knew what it was or where it was near. And I'm afraid that's going to attract a lot of unwanted attention.
Hopefully.
Yeah, we may have New Agers out there. Hopies just get real irritated by New Agers,
No plan.
because they come in and they learn things, and they have fire walks and they have all these different things, and where they're imitating things that are part of the Hopi religion, but not doing it properly. And as I said, that's very dangerous. But I said they talked to me because they knew I wouldn't try to do it. But I had to be very careful not to write any. Someone said, oh, you ought to write a book about this. I wouldn't dare,
Well, that makes sense.
because writing a book about it would be making money off of their culture, and that's not appropriate behavior.
That's it. I'm good.
Karen,
Yes,
and that's kind of the same thing about how people want to know exactly what the petroglyphs mean also,
yeah.
that we can't. Yeah,
I tell them, what does this mean?
Yeah.
You know, victory in Europe,
Yeah, peace in the hippies.
peace sign.
rabbit ears.
Yeah, it can mean all kinds. It just depends
Interpretation.
on your interpretation of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I worked. I had a volunteer that worked for me at Homology, and it was my pastor's wife, and she got so frustrated because the story kept changing that the archaeologists were telling. And I said, but Jan, they're learning more things all the time. And that's why the interpretation changes. Well, she wanted to know
Right.
and get an answer and have it settled. That's not the way it works. Any other questions?
I would
Anybody?
just,
Go ahead, Darlene.
I would just like to add about that, those checkerboard symbols with the dot in them on her kachinas that she has there, that those, we also see those on petroglyphs, and we see them on pottery designs.
Wow.
There's also some,
Those corn symbols.
some symbols have multiple meanings. So in this particular case, those are corn, but these on petroglyphs and stuff may be the waffle gardening. Like at Chavez Pass, they would use make these little squares of raised soil to irrigate the plants. So it could be waffle gardening.
Interesting.
Karen,
Yes,
didn't Kelly Hayes think that they had something to do with tie-dye, the tie-dyes, like from the Potecas, like the robe that's over there in Verde Valley that they have from the Dyke collection?
I'm not sure. She never said anything about that to me. So I don't know,
Okay.
but as I said, symbols can have multiple meanings. Yes,
I had that conversation with Mary Ann Connor, she's an archaeologist out of Payson, about the meaning of petroglyphs. And she gave me the best analogy I ever heard. And take the apple. An apple to a teacher is a symbol of respect. An apple to a baker could be an ingredient to a pie. An apple to a healthcare professional could be for good health. The apple means different things to different people, and the petroglyph can also mean different things to the creator, the interpreter,
Exactly.
the passerby.
That's a great.
yeah,
That's a good analogy.
it also mean gravity.
Yeah.
The
So
only-
yeah, it's,
The only one that really knows what the meaning of a petroglyph is the person that put it
The
there.
guy that picked it out, yeah.
Well, with that, I want to thank you, Karen. That was a fantastic talk.
I think he was so shocked when I said, I don't have any pictures, I don't have any.
Oh, it was wonderful.
All that's in that computer that died.
You didn't need them.
You did.
Right.
No, you got along just fine without it.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I'll go ahead and close the meeting and again, thank you much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Karen.